Dobar dan. It has been a long day, but fascinating day, and I'm very happy to introduce the next debate, which actually is very, very close, which flows from the previous debate about international criminal justice, about the ICTY. So we'll be speaking about the ICTY archives between justice and memory, and not only ICTY archives, also other archives which are very important. I'm thinking about NGOs archives and also the Humanitarian Law Center archives, which also need to have a very important future. So it will be part of a discussion. And I was listening to the previous debate, and I had to remember, came to me to, and maybe some of you might remember what happened in March 1993, when the resolution, the older among us might remember when the resolution 808 and 827 were adopted, which created the ICTY, and we know how the ICTY became such an important body, despite all its limitation. In the same time, during that time in 1993, when the resolution was adopted about to maintain and restore peace when there was no peace to be maintained, it was a bit strange. And I remember also that a few years later, I wanted to ask Roland Dumas, who basically was a person who went to the Security Council and with the draft resolution 808 to be voted. Why are you doing this? Because what you have done it by creating the first ever international criminal tribunal ever was a very important decision, because then the next year there was the International Tribunal for Rwanda, Resolution 955. And a few years later, there was the ICC, the International Criminal Court, which was decided, the statutes were decided in Rome. And he told me, I had a problem. I was very much afraid that one day I will be indicted with Milosevic and with Mladic and Karadzic, because we are perceived, the French President Mitterrand, my friend, and myself, to be very, very close to these people. So when my justice minister came to see me with this moral idea of a tribunal, I said, great, I will use it as a shield. And I found it so extraordinary, so cynical. And at the same time, when we think about it, we have today, for cynical reason, a real tribunal which was able to perform. So, maybe there is some morality in it. I don't know. I'll let you to reflect. But by creating this tribunal, by maintaining peace, there was also the concept of prevention. Prevention means deterrence, means possibly memorialization, not much of deterrence. Srebrenica 2 years later after the ICTY, but let's forget about it. It's about dissemination of information. It's about memorization, museums and textbooks and all of that. And we know how it is difficult. So I think the discussion of today also is going to happen in a very specific context. And I think it's important to realize the context in which this discussion is going to take place. I think it's possibly the first time we are having an American president who is against an international criminal tribunal so much, who is against human rights, which against independence of the justice system. And that's something which is major because it has direct influence everywhere. That's the first dimension. Obviously, the second dimension is what's happening in Ukraine. Obviously, war crimes and crimes against humanity are back on European soil, which also is part of a discussion. And the third element, possibly, is denial is not new. But the ocean of fake news, of TikTok, of disinformation hasn't reached such a huge level as today. So in this context, I'm very happy to discuss. I mean, there are three main questions which I guess we'll be discussing, or you will be discussing. One is, what really does the societies of former Yugoslavia want to hear about the judiciary truth? The second question is if, and it's a big if they want to hear about it. So, how to make it accessible? How do you translate very complicated judicial language to the public? You know, I remember some of judgments which contain more than 1,000 pages. How do you make it accessible to normal people? You don't. Third question is about how such a judicial truth can be part of a general ethos, become part of a collective identity. So that's why I'm delighted to have 4 persons, or even 5 persons, even one is electronically with us, but not physically with us, who are all coming from The Hague or Amsterdam. So let me introduce you. I'm on the wrong page, obviously. But Samuel Algazin from the Office of the Registrar of the Residual Mechanism of the ICTY, then Nike Wendholt and Siri Bryson, who is with us online from the University of Utrecht, and Peter Finzig from University of Amsterdam, and Victor Jan Vos, thank you so much, from NIOD, Institute of War, Holocaust and Genocide. So thank you so much for each of you, and please, Samuel.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and just to thank Ms. Kandic for the kind invitation, and to the organizers as well, to participate in such a fascinating and interdisciplinary discussion about very important topics. I work in the Office of the Registrar of the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals. The IRMCT is the successor institution to the ICTY. We inherited the rights and obligations of the ICTY and also the Rwanda Tribunal, the ICTR, so we have a dual mandate in that regard. Part of our mandate includes the archives of the ICTY and the ICTR, as well as the continually produced archives for the IRMCT. And I'll speak primarily about the ICTY archives and about the Hague branch elements of the mechanism's mandate, as opposed to our other branch in Tanzania. Now, in the Office of the Registrar, under the statute of the mechanism, the archives section is part of the registry, and so the Office of the Registrar oversees the archives section of the mechanism. Now, I'm not an archivist. I'm a lawyer, and so I as far as technical knowledge of archival matters, my knowledge is continually improving, but it's limited. But I hope today to give you a sense of the efforts that we're making at the mechanism to preserve the archives, to provide access to the archives, and to talk a little bit about the future and what might be ahead as far as the future of the ICTY and mechanism Hague branch archives. Now, under our mandate to manage the archives, the two key components are preservation of the archives and accessibility of the archives. What does our archive entail? It entails, or what makes up our archive. It's made up of the judicial case records from 20 years of proceedings, 20 plus years of proceedings. Some of these records are public, some of them are confidential, but it includes all of the case records. It also includes the records of which are related to judicial proceedings, but not part of the formal case record. So this would be things like records of our detention unit, records of our defense management system, records of our witness protection system that are not per se part of the judicial record. And then also we have kind of our institutional archives, our administrative records, our records of diplomatic relations. And so we have an extremely large archive. It's both in terms of digital archives and physical records. Now, kind of for the purposes of this gathering, the most important, just from the discussion, the most important part of our archives is that related to judicial proceedings. And I would say that our archives contain an authoritative record of the ICTY proceedings and the Hague branch trial proceedings and appeal proceedings and other judicial proceedings. And this includes testimony, it includes exhibits, it includes judgments, it includes judicial decisions. And so to that extent, it contains a vast repository of factual evidence and legal findings, and factual findings and legal findings from ICTY proceedings. And not only the judgments themselves and the factual findings, but it contains testimonies. It contains testimonies of the victims who came and testified, without whom the trials wouldn't have been able to go forward. I mean, it relied on their testimony. Our archives contain their testimony, and the testimony that the judges relied upon in making their rulings as to the guilt or innocence of particular defendants. And to that extent, there's a very kind of core human and personal element of what's in our archives. That it contains individual stories of people who came to testify, often under real security threat, but who were brave enough to come forward and testify. So we have a vast repository of human stories, of factual findings and legal findings, and we have the mandate to make sure that these materials are accessible and that they're preserved. Now, when we talk about access to those records, some of the records are confidential, some of them are public. Our goal is to make the public records as accessible as possible, and we undertake a lot of various efforts to make sure that those records are accessible. We have a catalog which our archives department has put together of the publicly available materials. We have our unified judicial database, which is available from our website, which contains access to public judicial records. One of the most important aspects of the accessibility of our the access that we provide to our archives is in the context of domestic criminal proceedings, often in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Croatia, in Serbia, where there's formal requests for sometimes confidential, sometimes public information that is utilized in domestic criminal proceedings. And then we have a number of requests from researchers, from students, from academics, from documentary filmmakers, and we do our best to provide these materials where they're public. We even getting back to the importance of victim testimony. We've had requests from family members who wanted to see one of the testimony of one of their relatives. So when we talk about kind of memory, when we talk about memory, we have there's kind of a very personal level at which our materials are used, both institutionally and personally. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. And I can imagine the huge challenge also. You have million, or I don't know, tens of millions of pages actually of documents. And how do you organize it, and how is it possible to access it? And then we'll discuss maybe later about the language, the judicial language being used, and how to translate it in a different way. So please, Victor Jan.
Thank you very much, Dobar dan. I will probably continue on what Samuel has told, and from a probably different perspective. My name is Victor Jan Vos. I'm Director of Collections and Services at NIOD, which is an institute that researches war, Holocaust, and genocide in Amsterdam. To take you back into what I'm actually want to convey to you, I want to take you a little bit back towards the history of the NIOD, and that's what we were founded right after the war in 1945 in Amsterdam. And that was 3 days after the war has ended, the occupation of the Netherlands has ended. And the government at that time realized that it was important to collect personal documents in relation towards the administrative or bureaucratic documents. So to give a full perspective of what happened during the war in the Netherlands, it became really important to collect as much materials, much archive, documentation, books, witness statements as possible. And that has become very successful. So I manage now a department of where we hold about 4 kilometers of archival material, and that includes, for example, 2,500 diaries, 300,000 letters of people, just regular people that were sent during the Second World War in the Netherlands. And still that archive is very well used. And that is because I think the Second World War, especially in the Netherlands, has this moral imperative on our society. So what we think is right and what we think is wrong stems from that. Of course, after the wars in the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s, we all found out that we did not learn a lot from these things. So as the NIOD decided that we also had to move on a little bit, we expanded our reach and our vision to research also genocide, mass violence that happened after the Second World War. Specifically, we were quite famous in having been commissioned by the Dutch government to inquire and do a very large research project into the involvement of the Dutch in the fall of Srebrenica in 1995. That report came out in 2002. And that was actually a political research document. It wasn't a very personal document, and in that way it was very NEOT-like. It was really something that was done. What did the state, or what could the state have done to prevent these things from happening, and what was the political implication of that? For the Netherlands, the political implications was very clear. The government resigned almost immediately after this report was developed, which I would not say was a success on behalf of the NEOT, because there were too many people have died in that process, but it was a success in the basis of responsibility and accountability from a government who was probably not guilty, but still very much accountable on this whole level. If you look at that report now, that's 25 years ago almost, you'll see that the voice of the victims and of the people who lived in Bosnia at the time, or lived in Srebrenica at the time, was not really heard in that report, I would say. So there's a lot missing in that report. And we have done a few of these very large reports after, about the involvement of the Dutch state into the decolonization war between the Netherlands and Indonesia. And we have learned from that. So we have also taken in the accounts of the people who lived there, who endured the violence at the time. Today we are doing a commissioned report also by the state into the involvement of the Dutch soldiers in Afghanistan. And again, there's a very important part in how did people find and endured that report. So that's why I'm very happy that Samuel told that about the witness statements that are so important, so personal in the ICTY archive. Because we feel that that combination between the personal story and the administrative things are very important. Today, we still continue and collect a lot of material from the Second World War relating to the Netherlands, but we also, of course, want to look into archives that have been what you can consider at risk. That means that they are not stored very well, or they're digitally not very well accessible, or there's some political ways of doing so. And one of the things that I consider at risk, and that's not because it's not well managed at the moment, but that because there's some kind of political pressure behind it, is the ICTY archive. There is a UN resolution that orders the mechanism to find solutions for the archive, so there is some concern about that. But also we feel from a NEOT perspective that we would want to have this better on the political agenda. So there should be some efforts done by the international community, and I would say not in the last place the Dutch government, because The Hague is in the Netherlands, to find some solutions for both the archive as a monument towards, for international justice, but also as a monument for the victims of the crimes, the war crimes that have been committed. As well as, of course, the building itself, which I won't go into details, but there are some discussions about that as well. So I would emphasize that the archive need to be preserved and need to be upkept. Well, that's going to happen probably via the UN archival system, but also it should be made accessible and better accessible for researchers. And researchers, historians, or legal scholars, political scholars, they probably don't research just a court case. So if you are an archivist, you would know that an archive is probably created hierarchically. So there's a court case, and there's probably a first instance, and there's an appeal, and then there's a first trial, there's witness statements, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. So you have these pile of things that a researcher needs to divide. What we actually want to do is to enable researchers to make available these kinds of archives, so not just the ICTY archives, but to make it available based on people, or based on events, or based on timelines. So a witness could talk in one court case about one event, and then maybe another court case which is probably not really related, but there might be some information in another part of the archive that you would find there. And I think we should make archives available a little differently in that case. And I think the ICTY archive can serve as a basis for that. So what we've asked the mechanism to obtain a digital copy of the full archive in itself, in full, and the discussions about that are on the way. And we want to try and make that archive available via this means. There's a new standard of way of describing archives. It describes this little bit, this topical combination of things. It's called records in contexts. And that means that named entities, so names, places, times, people, events, will be identified in an archive. And then you can easily combine the other events or names or named entities that you would find in another document or another archive. That's what we really would like to do. Of course, that requires a lot of effort. But I think, and I'm a bit of a technological optimist, so you have to maybe excuse me for that, because I know also there are a lot of problems with that, but I think the technologies of artificial intelligence would enable us to doing so. There are technologies which are safe and which are not owned by the big tech corporations at this time that will enable people to very easily identify those names and places in archival documents. And they would be able to create this system that I was talking about. So then the system that I'm describing would enable researchers, all of you, to find very intuitively these kinds of documents and information that you're looking for. So that's actually what I'm trying to propose, and I think that will work. So in conclusion, making sure that physical archives are stored correctly and making the archives digitally available, I think something that the second part that we can do, the first part that needs to be sorted out by the people in charge, to make that in collaboration with the researchers and with people that actually are relating to this thing, because I realize that I'm sitting in Amsterdam, but actually the documents and the events that we're talking about are, of course, in this region. But I'm very happy and enthusiastic about that, and so I hope that we can continue with this. Thank you.
Well, sounds great. And also what is striking is the ICTY was conceived almost as an experiment, as a laboratory. And what you said also reminds us that the victims were totally forgotten during the ICTY basically statutes. And with the ICC there is a different approach, and the voice of the victims today are better heard. So please, Nikkei and Siri, you're going to share your time between the two, so please proceed.
Thank you so much, Dobar dan svima. Thanks a lot to the organization for allowing us here to speak with you about how we can explore the ICTY as a place of cultural heritage, or in other words, how the ICTY can move from being a frozen archive to a multi-directional memory practice. Or in even other words, an update from the Netherlands. What the heck are you doing with that building? Well, I hope to offer some insight today. So to see the ICTY as a site of memory is of course not new. Otto Spijkers called the ICTY court rulings in 2021 already as legal monuments. And today we want to explore if there's more in the ICTY that we can see in terms of monuments and museums. And I think this is a very timely question. How I see it, there are two movements now in the Netherlands that come together in creating this momentum. The first one is the fight by the Bosnian Dutch community for a monument for the genocide in Srebrenica. This was a promise as well from the mayor of Den Haag, The Hague, in 2020. Then it was silent for some time, as the Netherlands tends to do. But recently, a lot of progress has been achieved, so there is now a placeholder, a temporary monument, made out of the headstones imported from Potocari, the same headstones same stone as the headstones are made of, broken down by Dutch citizens and then brought together 8,372 pieces in this placeholder monument. And importantly, this placeholder is in front of the ICTY, so it's on Churchill Square. It was revealed on July 11 this year. And the other movement has to do with the end of the work of the mechanism, and then what should happen to the building. So there has been a recent report published. Peter Vinci was involved in that as well. That concluded that there's a lot of potential of the ICTY to become a museum of justice. And Siri and I think we would agree that the ISTY is not only meaningful to the Bosnian Dutch community or the Balkan Dutch community or to the Balkans, but especially to the Dutch community as well, to further explore questions of our responsibility. I say that as a Dutch citizen, but also to the international community as a whole, because the ISTY symbolizes so many of these narratives. So to that end, in a recent article, we identified 6 of such narratives that already the ICTY came to represent during its lifespan, to show that the ICTY in a way was already this kind of moving, living museum monument during its lifespan, and even more in its potential future, in its afterlife. So it goes too far to elaborately discuss these 6 narratives, but we wanted to show that apart from the idea of trying and sentencing war criminals, there was also this indeed short-lived hope that it will deter war crimes, which was then replaced by this idea that then it would at least help to support reconciliation. Then the attention became more on its potential historical function. The EU also kind of moved in there by placing the ISTY in its own political relations narrative, by making it a condition for European Union accession. And the kind of 6 narratives that we identified is that of its potential to counter denial, which you also mentioned in regards to the present day. So what we really hoped to do there was show that the ISTY already during its lifespan prompted us to continuously re-evaluate the relation between peace and justice, and probably does so in its future too, in its afterlife too. So I hope Siri is somewhere with us and can take over here.
Siri, I'm not talking to the iPhone, but to a person.
Oh, there she is.
Yeah, it's here. Okay. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me well?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so thanks, Nikkei. I would like to continue a little bit on Nikkei's talk and in talking about the ICTY from a perspective of heritage and archival studies. Like as Nikkei said, the ICTY has comprised many different meanings and narratives in its course of existence. But yeah, in our article, we also try to think a bit about its afterlife. And we would then argue that there is a need to reconsider the future of the ICTY and connect it to its role as a site of cultural heritage and also of multi-directional memory. So in the article, we explore the potential of the future potential of the ICTY and also its legacy from a perspective of heritage and cultural studies. So we could say that, as an idea, the ICTY is comprised of a mix of tangible, symbolic, and also emotional references to the research, all the testimonies and all the sentences that occurred there. But at the same time, we can also say that the ICTY as a site of tangible history, because there is a building, there is archival material. They allow visitors to get into, have an entry point to the past and also make the connection with the present. And when thinking about the kind of material that is stored in the archive, we were inspired by the work of Susan Shupli, who is an artist and researcher who coined the concept of material witness. And with the archive as material witness, she alludes to the fact that archives are not only about the content that is in the archive itself, but that the content also shows a lot about how it was created. So we could say that the material stored by the ICTY says a lot about how we think about law, for instance, and what people can tell and cannot tell in a testimony. And also, for instance, blurry video materials, they don't only tell us something about facts that happened in war, but also tell us a different story, maybe about how difficult it is to collect evidence during a war, if there are some literal references to the idea of the fog of war, for instance. So if we open up a little bit our perspective on how we look at what archival material is and can be, it might be possible to connect the material of the ICTY also to, well, more general or different stories about war and war crimes, and as such also keep its content alive and bring it forward, right? Because if we think about heritage and archive, we can say that both are never-ending processes, right? The archive is always open-ending. There is always a possibility of new material to be added. Heritage is always, it says a lot about the past, but also very much about what we think is important at the moment and in the future, and as such, new layers of meanings can always be added to the ICTY. We would argue that is really important, as we also agree that there is many, let's say, things that the ICTY could not achieve. There is silences, there is stories that could not be heard. And as such, if we would regard the archive as an open-ended project, there might be room to fill in those silences and include different voices in the archive or in the story that the archives tell, and as such have a more create a more multi-voiced story of what happens in the Balkans. We end our article with talking about some of the artists that have actually worked with the content of the ICTY, but also with the building in The Hague as a site for exploring different narratives of the ICTY. And I think I would like to end this particular talk with pleading for a very active approach to, first of all, the building, maintaining it, keeping it, and using it as a place where new stories might be developed, especially through artistic works and engaging in collaborations with artists who, I think, have the potential of showing different sides of what the archive was, what the ICTY was, and how it can continue, and as such allow for a deeper and also richer understanding of the history and the future.
Thank you so much, Siri. Thank you for joining online. And I think there is something. The concept of having transforming the ICTY building in a museum today takes total new resonance, because it's part of a battlefield, basically, between the US and Europe. And we are living in a day when the ICC prosecutor and a number of judges are under US sanctions, and the whole court might be very soon under US sanctions. So having such a museum would be quite a challenge also in relation to the discussion with the US. So we'll see what's going to happen. Very curious. Thank you so much, Peter, to intervene.
I was going to follow up on that briefly. So the future of the building of the ICTY became a bit of an issue a couple of years ago, as the mechanism for residual mechanism for criminal tribunals started downsizing, as they say in the US lingo, or as the number of people who were actually working there started to become smaller and smaller. And so the owner of the building, which is the Dutch real estate agency, decided that it was perhaps time to consider other uses for this very large and very monumental, some of you may have seen it, building. And they decided that the way to go was to basically rent it to the highest bidder and then get the mechanism out. And then, luckily for the memory and history of the ICTY, a group of academics from the University of Amsterdam got involved and said, well, you can't just do that. There's a value to this place which goes beyond real estate value, which is a value to the history and memory of the people, not only in the former Yugoslavia, but also to the international criminal justice and the wider community that still may have some interest in the processes of international criminal justice. And so there was a protracted negotiation between these two academics and the real estate agency, which I'm very happy to say I was not part of. And then it took 2 years, and in the end, these two professors managed to basically convince the real estate agency in the validity of their proposal, and so they got commissioned to write a report about the historical and memory value of that building in Churchill Plain 1. Which they did with a group of people, including me, and well, I'm not an architect, so I wasn't as much involved, but I was happy to contribute. In the end, we came up with the report that Nike has mentioned, which has proposed several different scenarios, but all of which scenarios include that part of the building would remain as a memory site and would remain as some sort of museum. Perhaps not a museum of justice. Other people have other ideas. It's all under consideration now. But I'm very happy to report that it appears that it worked, surprisingly enough. The government has taken our advice under consideration, and now they have actually employed an architectural company that is looking into the possibility to create that space in the building. So there was a small win of academy against administration, which I don't think is very often the case, so I wanted to share this story with you. And secondly, I would like to follow up on what Victor Jan was saying about making the ICTY's archive more accessible and the documents in it more findable. I was working with Victor Jan for the past 18 months on a project that was not that, but similar in a sense, which was an idea to do a pilot project to explore the possibility to collect information about archival collections from anywhere that have documents related to the wars in the former Yugoslavia, and make that information available in one centralized database. And then I'm not talking only about war crimes, I'm talking about the totality of wars. Because, of course, the wars in the former Yugoslavia took 1 decade, and there were other things happening other than war crimes. And so we wanted to explore the idea to collect the information about the archival collections, describe that collection, say what kind of documents they contain, and then make it available to the people today or to the people tomorrow. And in parallel with that idea, we wanted to actually make a group, a community around this database, a community of people who would be interested in reading what's in it, contributing to information in it, and then spreading the information further on. I'm happy to say the pilot was well done, it was well received, and we are now waiting for funding to see the next stage. And if it happens, I'll be happy to let you all know. And this is it for me at the moment. Thank you very much for the organizers for inviting me, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Peter, and hope that it's going to happen very soon. So please, Danilo Kalejic from WIVI Institute of History, please.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Hvala i gospođi Kandić na organizaciji jednog ovako značajnog događaja, koji mnogi na ranijim panelima i meni ovo prvi put učestvujem u jednom od REKOM-ovih događaja, i kad ste me pozvali, kad ste pomenuli da je tema arhivska građa, rad u arhivima, tretman arhiva u postjugoslovenskom prostoru, imao sam jedno pa kao optimističko razmišljanje. Jer obično kad dođemo u fazu da se bavimo arhivama, znači da smo stavili tačku ili da stavljamo tačku na jedan proces. Nažalost, na Balkanu, a to znamo, to se dešava u realnom vremenu dok mi ovdje razgovaramo, taj proces je daleko od završenog. Dakle, taj proces i dalje traje, iako naravno tretman arhive koji ostaje za tribunalom treba da bude riješen neki od predloga koje smo čuli na tehničkom nivou. Ja sam apsolutno saglasan sa njima, uz taj dodatak da bih lično volio da u jednom trenutku dio te građe u fizičkom smislu bude recimo u Crnoj Gori. Dozvolite mi tu vrstu subjektivnosti i iz nekih drugih tehničkih razloga. Ali moramo kroz priču, ako ostavimo arhivu samo kao arhivu, bilo to digitalno, što je naravno, što je u 21. vijeku se podrazumijeva, bez jedne nadogradnje kroz institucionalnu, edukativnu komponentu, onda ćemo doći u situaciju kao za mnoge druge slučajeve da ta arhiva bude predmetom odnosno predmet instrumentalizacije. Znate, u arhivu ulaze dva tipa ljudi. Prvi koji se arhivom bave, koji u arhivi traže dokaze, koji arhivu koriste kao podlogu za naučni rad. A imamo i dostinu onih drugih koji arhivu ulaze kako bi našli, kako bi legitimizovali svoje političke stavove, odnosno kako bi instrumentalizovali ono što su njihova ili predubjeđenja ili njihove političke, ideološke i druge agende. Sa ovim drugim imamo i tekako veliki problem, ne samo kad govorimo o ovim arhivama, nego i mnogim drugim, i arhiva tribunala bez ove nadogradnje, odnosno bez institucionalne nadogradnje kroz istraživački, edukativni, univerzitetsku komponentu, koja treba i dalje da tumači nešto što je rad tribunala, nešto što za tim tribunalom ostaje. A da se vratim na početak, suočavanje sa ratnom prošlošću. Ono što je dovelo do ratova u bivšoj Jugoslaviji, a govorim evo vrlo konkretno o velikosrpskom nacionalizmu, dominantno, je nešto što je i dalje vrlo žilavo i vrlo živo. I ta arhiva u teoriji treba da bude nešto što će taj proces, odnosno tu vrstu velikodržavnog nacionalizma koji je na Balkanu i takako aktivan i prisutan, treba da bude način da učimo kako da se tome suprotstavimo. I zbog toga, ako je moja ocjena ili moja refleksija na ono što smo slušali tokom cijelog dana, je da ta arhivska građa, gdje god ona završi, u kojoj god formi, u formi muzeja, u formi digitalnoj, dakle, da ne ulazimo sad u previše tehničke detalje, treba da služi kao komponenta izučavanju načina da se suprotstavimo nečemu što je i dalje prisutno. Jer u suprotnom, ako to prepustimo klasičnom arhivskoj sudbini, dakle da to sjedi u nekoj kutiji i da bude prepušteno istraživačima koji imaju, odnosno ne istraživačima, nego propagandistima koji imaju ovu političku agendu, onda ćemo se suočiti sa time da ta vrsta nacionalizma, koja je vrlo živa, ponavljam, opet počne da proizvodi probleme. U prethodnom panelu uvaženi ambasador Vlahović je pomenuo jednu od ključnih stvari, a tiče se toga da nikad nije došlo do totalnog poraza. I tom observacijom završavam. Nažalost, politička međunarodna zajednica nije dozvolila da velikosrpski nacionalizam finalni, odnosno totalni poraz. I zbog toga, kad god raspravljamo o ovim temama, treba da imamo na umu da totalni poraz nije proizveo katarzu kakvu smo vidjeli u Njemačkoj ili Japanu. I zbog toga mi živimo u jednom interregumu, u jednom međuprostoru između nečega što mi želimo da projektujemo kao vrijednostnu političku realnost i onog što se zaista dešava. A to je da sve one stvari i oni uzroci rata na prostoru bivše Jugoslavije su i dalje prisutni među nama i među našim, odnosno među državama naslednicama bivše Jugoslavije. I sad finalno stvarno završavam, a vraćam se na temu same arhive. Ono što je važno za razumijevanje, odnosno za čitavu metodiku rada Međunarodnog krivičnog suda, je da je on uspostavio minimum istine. Dakle, to je nešto što nije potpuna istina, što nije čak ni činjenično, odnosno historiografski potpuno dopunjeno. Dakle, sud je uspostavio nešto što je minimalna istina, odnosno minimum činjenica na bazi kojih je izvukao presudu. Dakle, arhiva treba da bude podloga da se ispriča i ona priča koja fali u tradicionalnom, odnosno standardnom krivičnom pravu. Hvala.
Ja ću da nastavim. Pa neće Haška arhiva da ostane u kutijama. Najveći deo te arhive je javan. Ta baza podataka koja je dostupna, ona je toliko obimna da još nije deo istražen i za istraživanje i za postavljanje dobre kulture sećanja. Ona je fantastična osnova, ali postoji nešto drugo nasuprot te Haške arhive, a to je danas mnogo pominjana ta politička volja. Tako da, iako je javna Haška arhiva javna, ona je pokrivena političkom voljom. I to je, zato nema u javnom prostoru govora o dokazima koji su dostupni na toj Haškoj arhivi i u toj bazi podataka, pa postoji digitalna Haška arhiva koju su doprineli mnogi značajni svedoci, naučnici koji su formirali od svojih ekspertskih analiza i drugih dokumenata fantastične kolekcije u odnosu na pojedinačne predmete. Znači, postoji dosta, dovoljno za brojne istraživače, a sada živimo neki trenutak kada tih istraživanja nema mnogo i osim toga ja bih sada prešla na nešto što je Žarko Puhovski danas rekao, da je za žrtve posebno teško, za žrtve jednog rata teško kada počinje drugi rat. Mislio je na međunarodni nivo. Kada govorimo o našem nivou, to nije tako, zato što je Haški tribunal ostavio veoma dragoceno nasleđe iz kojeg bih izdvojila taj, da kažem, video arhivu. Ta video arhiva koja čuva glas žrtava. Mi u Fondu za humanitarno pravo smo jedini na prostoru nekadašnje Jugoslavije, ili ne znam, verovatno i Evropi, da niko drugi nema, da imamo kopiju te arhive. Snimali smo, imali smo veliku podršku i tužilaštva i suda, imali smo mali ofis u Haškom tribunalu, snimali smo i mi imamo snimljenih preko 9000 dana. To znači da imamo taj glas žrtava. On sad kad pogledamo te snimke žrtava, članova porodica koje su svedočile, danas posle 30 godina, pa to je onako predstavlja veliko bogatstvo i to je ona dimenzija čuvanje sećanja. Ali mi u Fondu za humanitarno pravo imamo tu čvrstu ideju da koristimo ono što smo prikupili ovih 33 godine. To je znači ova video arhiva, onda imamo značajan deo sudskih dokumenata, ne sve, ali kao i NIOD, i mi ćemo tražiti od mehanizma kolekcije koje su do sada, sudske kolekcije koje su do sada formirane. Onda ono što je značajno, mi imamo ta istraživanja pred početak oružanih sukoba i istraživanja kršenja ljudskih prava u toku oružanog sukoba u drugim delovima Jugoslavije, a ne dok nije počeo, da kažem, oružani sukob na Kosovu. Mislim na Vojvodinu, mislim na Sandžak i na Kosovo pre početka oružanog sukoba. Onda imamo fantastične te kolekcije na osnovu kojih je Haško tužilaštvo iniciralo istrage. To je naše istraživanje o Foči, bila je taj, da kažemo, okidač za istragu silovanja. Naše istraživanje logora u Dretelju takođe je bilo značajno za tužilaštvo. Znači, imamo nešto što nije deo Haške arhive, nešto što je bio rad organizacije koja je bila fokusirana na dokumentovanje ratnih zločina. Naša dokumentacija ili, vi svi znate, ne znam da li oni neki znaju, da smo mi uspeli da sve transkripte sa suđenja Slobodanu Miloševiću transkribujemo i da ih imamo u BCS-u. To je pomoglo mnogim lokalnim tužilaštvima da brže pripreme istragu, da brže pripreme dokaze. Tako da, znači, iako su međunarodno sad naše žrtve, ovih naših 130.000 zaboravljene, Imamo dosta značajnih stvari koje omogućuju da mi to nasleđe ne zaboravimo, da pokušamo da se organizujemo, ali iskreno bez podrške i mehanizma da dobijemo ono što nam nedostaje i bez saradnje sa ovakvim institucijama kao što je NIOD i neki drugi da kažem, instituti koji se bave zapravo koji su istraživali, imaju jaku istraživačku dokumentaciju. Bez povezivanja takvih institucija zapravo teško je zamisliti da možemo mi sad na našem prostoru ovom malom da se organizujemo i da odjednom postanemo taj relevantan izvor znanja. Potrebna nam je podrška, a ono što je potrebno u ovoj regiji to je da imamo nezavisni izvor informacija i da zapravo pokušamo da otvorimo to što imamo i da uključimo mlade u dalje istraživanje. Mi ne smemo da prestanemo sa istraživanjem, kao što ni NIOD neće prestati sa istraživanjem, ali važno je da uključimo mlade, da širimo to istraživanje i da prvi put u istoriji imamo nešto, a posebno u Srbiji, zbog velikog, da kažem, zbog velikog učešća u svim ratovima, zbog velike odgovornosti za žrtve, zbog velikog, da kažem, velike tišine u odnosu na prošlost, značajno je da ono što imamo otvorimo. U ovom trenutku govoriti o obrazovanju je potpuno, da kažem, toliko daleko da nema smisla i govoriti, ali da nastavimo istraživanje i da pokušamo da što više dobijemo, prikupimo sa strane kako bismo mogli u jednom trenutku da kažemo, a sad to može biti, završili smo tu tranziciju i sad imamo jak transformativni potencijal da postanemo relevantan izvor informacije.
Thank you, Natasha. Edina Mrčić with the Institute of History from Sarajevo. Thank you.
Dobro večer svima. Zovem se Edina Mrčić, dolazim sa Instituta za historiju Univerziteta u Sarajevu i zahvaljujem se organizatorima na pozivu. Ja sam prvi put na forumu, ali već sam jako umoran. Ne zbog današnjeg dana, tek smo počeli, jer umoran sam na jedan drugi način. Dakle, ovom se temom profesionalno, dakle, dobijam mjesečna primanja, zato bavim od nekad 2008. godine, kada sam počeo raditi na institutu. Dakle, to je jedno vrijeme, sad ću spomenuti ovdje samo dvije knjige. To je nakon vremena što su izašle doktorske disertacije profesora Jovića ili Dragović Soso, koje sam ja dugo vremena nakon svog zapošljavanja u institutu koristio kao literaturu. I sad hoću reći da taj proces ne samo, nadam se da nije samo do mene, da se ne radi samo o mom tom nekom naučnom sazrijevanju koje je jako sporo, ide polako. To je, i sad mi u neku ruku ono na šta se ja u svom tom nekom naučnom radu jako svjestan dometa i vlastitog dometa i dometa bosansko-hercegovačke historiografije, pokušavam baviti je način na koji kao historičar pokušavam čitati što više, što je više moguće, pokušavam naći teme koje nisu obrađene i pokušavam neki svoj naučni interes usmjeriti na ono, to je neka maksima, da se nikada više nikome ovo što smo mi doživjeli ne ponovi. I mislim da smo, i tu mislim da treba zapravo uz svo poštovanje žrtava zapravo proučavati počinioca. Ne samo to, ali da se može pažnja više posvetiti počiniocima. Imali smo sjajne knjige koje su govorile o mindsetovima škorpiona, o ljudima koji su to snimali. Imamo i drugo izdanje, Oni ne bi ni mrava zgazili, ali da li smo na neki način tu s tim proučavanjem tog patrijarhalnog mindseta zaustavljeni? Da li ću ja biti bezobrazan ili previše ekscentričan ako kažem da naša je čitava ova mediteranska civilizacija, prva riječ naše civilizacije je srdžba. Nikada mi nismo, barem ja ne znam, da smo recimo temu povratka ratnika kući koji dolazi, ubija ženu, djecu. Znači to je naša stara tema. Nismo dovoljno dobro obradili i stavili i fokusirali se na te neke nikad nismo dovoljno demilitarizirali naša društva. Nama je Ježurka Ježić jedna simpatična životinjica koja brani nešto što je samo njegovo, a nikad nam niko nije rekao zapravo ok, ali šta on to, jel on osim što je onako samo latentno naoružan, jel, sa kopalja 300, od koga on to brani? Jel to on stvarno u opasnosti? Ili postoji li nekad, da li možemo naći neki moment, trenutak da vidimo da će taj naoružana, simpatična životinjica u jednom momentu eksplodirati, jel? I to su ta neka pitanja koja pokušavam postaviti sam sebi, jel? Dok izučavam zapravo od svega ovoga što ste napomenuli ranije, zapravo ja izučavam dokazni materijal i preko tog dokaznog materijala, znači i fotografske građe, video zapisa, zvučnih zapisa, stenograma, pokušavam da uz čitanje i presuda i svih tih sudskih, sve te sudske dokumentacije pokušavam stvoriti neku sliku naše prošlosti, našeg svršenog vremena. Toliko, ne znam, nisam da.
Well, we all understand the challenge that sometimes it's more difficult to demilitarize the minds of the people than the armies. And that's a real challenge. And we see that archives will remain a battlefield for a foreseeable future. But I would like to offer questions and observations.
Yeah, thank you so much for this brilliant panel. It was a really brilliant look forward to the future on the basis of facts, trials, things that we have discussed today. But what I'm noticing also in this very wishful thinking for the future is that it still lacks planning of the change. So we know, like in all your presentations, we have seen that you are planning for a change. You are assuming why the people need access to archives, but you're not very clear on how these archives are going to be used. What impact are you trying to achieve for whom are you planning to achieve that impact? And I'm referring to this especially because I'm noticing, like how this ownership of knowledge of the past shifts a bit between like what is international justice and to whom that international justice is directed to. So that's why I'm looking at Natasha. It's like, what is the purpose then of, like trials, tribunals, decisions, facts finding about the past when that knowledge is not assimilated locally. So like we are also talking about some kind of decolonization of the knowledge and truth, which is quite important. But I would maybe like to hear your reflection on this, and maybe Pierre's as well, because you're one of the pioneers actually that thought about how we can capture and measure change. How can we think about the impact of transitional justice? 2006, if not mistaken, yeah?
Well,
it's a great question. So thank you for that. I can talk about the experience that NEOD has had with the World War II archives. And there we, I think, as one of the few countries in Europe, have combined these administrative and personal things. And that brought about real change. So that brought about real visions about who were those people that actually committed war crimes and who were actually collaborating with the Germans. And I think that would go for any conflict also later. So the principles that we stand upon, the tradition, excuse me, will probably be the same. What we should realize, I think, is that the archives in itself are not meant for the purposes that you try to envision. So it's not meant for reconciliation, or it's not meant for giving the victims a voice. These are meant for a judicial process where there was an indictment and someone was prosecuted or not, and they went to prison or not. That was the process of things. That we put on a new meaning towards it, it's our own decision, our own process that we're going to do, and probably next generations will do it differently than we have done. So the archive in itself is not neutral. But for me, it's the only way that we can present the information that we made at this time for the people that come after us. So it's probably not the answer to your question.
But how are you going to measure the impact, the real change? How are you going to measure how many people are going to use it? What are you going to do with it? Like, what are the uses are going to be, like?
I don't know. I have no idea. But I think I do think it's still important to do it anyway.
Yeah, but ICTY, I'm saying this and I'm going to leave the floor for others, but this was the same illogical thinking with the planning of the ICTY. And Nike also said it was meant for reconciliation, it was meant for dealing with the past, it was meant to find facts. So I think it's very, very important that we think why we are doing this and for whom we are doing it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
May I add?
Yeah.
May I add a few
well,
words?
yeah. So, Peter, please.
Promotion.
No.
Everybody has a question. So I'd just like to mention briefly, because we don't have that much time, when we started doing the pilot project that I've described briefly before, first thing we did was speak to the people that we envisaged would be the future users. So it wasn't an academic exercise, it was actually done with the view of serving the users, and I shouldn't call them users, I should call them community. And I would like to emphasize the word community. It was envisaged to be a community of people who will be using it, and the impact will be the impact that the community will give it. So it wasn't something that Victorian and me sat down and said, oh, look at this project and let's get European money for it. No, it wasn't like that, and we didn't get the European money. So it was basically meant to serve a wider purpose, not necessarily a societal change, because that's above our pay grade, but I would say that societal change should probably come from societies rather than from the archives. Thank you.
I would like to use the presence of especially two of you, but I'm interested by everyone, but for very technical questions. I think it's for Samuel, the first one. Confidential evidence might be temporarily confidential. It depends. There are different statutes. Is there a mechanism, or is there any plan for servicing this issue, because because the witness do not need anymore some protection and would, or dead, would accept to have their statement open, or because there are some measure as 30 years or 50 years. So it's important for the future researcher whether the part of the confidential evidence, although it's a judicial, could be treated also from this point of view. And the second question is, I wanted just to say that state archives have special international protection, state archives on mass violence. There are resolutions on that. There is even a website on the UNESCO website because they don't know where to put it. Physically, where they will be. Of course, it's difficult to say bring them back to the original, to the countries, because they have gave to the tribunal only, I guess, copies. Some documents were seized by NATO, so some documents might be the original ones. And that's an issue. I don't know the answer, and I don't know if it goes for NIOD. It should be stored somewhere, and not only as judicial archives. That's what I want just to say. And physically, I don't have a solution where, but just as a specific statute that should be taken into account. And the last one is just in regard to that, the search engine which NIOD or an institution could store the digital or whatever, in what form archives, would they take into account the language? Sometimes English or French concepts are not translating very well the local one, and some researcher could be lost, and that's one of the issues.
Thank you very much for the question about the confidential records, and I think generally about declassification of confidential records. At present, the under both mechanism rules and regulations and also broader United Nations rules and regulations, the confidential status of judicial records is for the judges to determine as to whether there should be any variation or lifting of confidentiality of those records. And so it's something for the judges to determine, and that's at present that's done on a request basis, which most often happens in the context of domestic criminal proceedings, asking for variations of protective measures or access to confidential documents. As far as a broader, there isn't any that I'm aware of any broader plan as far as that is concerned, and so at present just those general principles of the judges being the ones who are empowered to declassify that's what we have at this point. So, but thank you for the question.
I would like to come back to the question of Anna. So I guess in a number of UN Security Council resolutions, the words reconciliation appeared, and a lot of these kind of very moralistic words. And really, there was with a lot of sometimes cynicism or hypocrisy, or sometimes naivety. We understand that if there is no political will at a specific location, nothing is going to happen. In Nuremberg trials, it's only, basically we had to wait to the late 60s that it became part of a German ethos. So it will be very difficult to be effective if there is no political will. And which brings me to a new layer, which is the new US doctrine that has been published for the last few days. I don't know how many of you has read it, the 29 pages, but I would advise you to do it absolutely. It's very, very important. And you will understand that, well, I understood that you are entering in a new world, and the human rights discourse is now totally opposed by the US administration, and that will have major impacts for many of us, and just to be aware of it, because I think it's changing also the conversation we're having until now. Thank you.
Can I? Thank you. Just a very quick comment. I don't want to take up much time. Basically, I just want to say that whatever the intentions are of an institution, fundamentally it doesn't matter, because in the future, researchers are going to be studying whatever questions they have at that particular time. And those questions will evolve over time, and so the archive and the institutional structures and the documentary evidence of all kinds will also serve future questions that we cannot anticipate at the moment. And I would just like to alert you to the Journal of Genocide Studies, which in the last few months has seen a call for new research on Srebrenica, new types of questions around Srebrenica by Max Bergholz, and also a recent article by Feđa Burić using the archive of the ICTY, asking questions that are not contained in the judgments, but are contained in the testimonies. So it's those things that I think will live on, and I think that's why the archive is important.
So just to answer Florence's last question for a second, yes, there was the plan, whatever we do with the archives, to include multilingual optionality, and the idea was to translate everything that we have into different languages, obviously using artificial interns and not doing it ourselves. So that was the plan. Now, of course, the problem of some things being difficult to translate, like for example outreach, that is going to just remain with us, and we'll just have to live with that. But definitely the plan was to have everything translated into languages that are relevant to the documents.
So again, from the perspective of a professor in Bosnia and Herzegovina and academia, I would really like to see our students coming to this, to The Hague to see this museum or whatever it is. But it's not just the museum, and we know this from Jacques Derrida, and this is exactly what Jasna was saying. That archive is not, what is in the archive is perhaps not ours to know. It is for further generations. It is for the times to come. And, whatever we find in the archive, it's not just the records. It's also a conceptual system. It's also asking questions that may be very, very different 20 years from today. And also, I somehow, as a feminist, I feel the urge to say we keep saying victims. And as somebody who also is has been through a lot physically, I would somehow like to use the term survivors. I think it's a stronger term than the term victims, because we need to move beyond. I think the importance of what the Forum is doing, what the Institute for International Humanitarian Law is doing here, and this is why I am here too, is to establish something, as we say, for za buduće neko pokoljenje, for future generations, for times to come. It may not be even our generation, but it's definitely, for the offspring. So again, what can be said, when and where, and what kind of questions we'll be asking about what happened to us, not as historians, not as lawyers, but as people. I really wish, I took my students once to the archives in Banja Luka, and they saw Women's Anti-Fascist Front, and they didn't know something like that ever existed. So I'm kind of certain that perhaps not in our generation, but in like 20 years from now, we'll be bringing students, we'll be giving them access to different archives, to videos, to not just the ICTY archives, but also the OHR archives, different kinds of archives. And I'm glad that you took this discussion to the level where archive is something more than the physical space, it's more than the collection of records, it's a space of thinking the past for the reference to the future. Thanks.
May I?
I know we have a limited time, so I would like to take 2 questions, unless we have more time. So there is a hand over there.
I'll take the opportunity to share one information and raise a question quickly. First of all, at the Institute of Crimes Committed During the War in Kosovo, we established an archive, which is taking into consideration that we are established in 2023. Very recently, actually, our archive currently contains materials collected from 14 different countries, more than 700 sources. And archivistically speaking, we have over 400 linear meters of physical material and over 20 terabytes of digital material. So please feel free to send your students or consider researching in our archive. This is the first kind of information. And secondly, we acknowledge ICT's adherence to the UNESCO Universal Declaration on Archives, making basically the mechanism the first UN institution to sign this management level. And as a result, I've handed over a request, like institutionally, to the mechanism back in June 2024, and the first response that I received was about eight months later, something like that. And unfortunately, the mechanism decided not to share the documents with us, suggesting us to check online and so on and so forth. Is there any way to receive these materials from the mechanism? Because as far as I heard, I'm not 100% sure, Kosovo is the only country that did not receive these materials as compared to other countries in the region. Thank you.
Just a short question. You mentioned that some documentary film authors addressed your institution in search for material. And my question is, who is allowed to use this material? Just the documentary people, or museum people, curators, or scientists? And what about writers, artists, comic makers?
Yes.
Are they allowed? I know of one case, and that's the case of Slavenka Drakulic, who was funded by the Dutch government and was ordered to write a literary book on war crimes. What about others? What is the possibility of using this material for all kinds of cultural industries and creation?
Well,
I hope I'm not sacrilege.
No, absolutely not. If I may, I've spent 10 years working for the outreach program. Now, the point of outreach was to reach out. And so whoever applied with request for material, if the material was publicly available, that is not confidential, absolutely.
That is not confidential, but of course, yes.
There are no limits on what you can do with it.
Wouldn't that then be logical that the building of the court becomes a cultural center?
The idea now, the municipality of The Hague is now thinking about something that would be memorial information center / museum / they don't really know. So they are looking into that, and something will come out of it. What I was talking about was the fight to preserve at least part of that place for some purpose other than offices. And that apparently will be the case. But what will come up there is a different thing, because there is an organization of Bosniak Dutch who would like to have it into memorial of Srebrenica mostly, and then other people have other ideas. So things will happen. But in response to your question, absolutely, public materials are publicly available. So that's.
Thank you. We'll finish here. Thank you so much.